The galactic cruiser Valthera cut through the inky blackness of space with the precision of a scalpel. Its hull gleamed with iridescent light, reflecting the vast stars as it approached its target, a small blue planet tucked away in the Milky Way. Earth. Commander Zara stood at the helm, her sharp violet eyes fixed on the holographic display of Earth rotating slowly before her. She crossed her arms, her silver armor catching the ambient glow of the ship's lights. Tall, muscular, and radiating confidence, Zara embodied the perfect Valtheran warrior, cold, calculating, and utterly ruthless. Behind her, 5 other women, each as fierce and formidable, prepared for the mission. They were the pinnacle of their species, engineered for war, conquest, and dominance. Each carried the poise of someone who had faced countless battles and emerged victorious. Earth, a primitive, barely spacefaring planet, was just another conquest on their long list. The intelligence gathered from previous surveillance suggests this planet's dominant species, humans, are weak and disorganized, Zara said, her voice smooth and commanding. Their technology is laughable. Their military strategies, primitive. We land, take out their command centers, and subjugate the population. The whole process should take 5 minutes. Maybe less. Lexi, the crew's chief scientist, nodded from her station, adjusting the calculations on a glowing console. Her analytical mind was always working several steps ahead of any scenario. I've run simulations based on their atmospheric conditions. Our physiology can adapt quickly to Earth's gravity, and their atmosphere is breathable, though it contains trace levels of chemicals we're unfamiliar with. Still, nothing we can't handle. Zara smirked. Perfect. Prepare the gravitation modulator for landing. The other warriors glanced at one another, their faces stoic but quietly confident. They had conquered planets far more advanced than this one. Earth was a backwater, a forgotten world whose inhabitants were barely out of their tribal stage, as far as the Valtherans were concerned. Sarah, the group's weapons specialist, strapped on her energy gauntlets with a grin. I've seen better defenses from rogue asteroids. This is going to be boring. Just stick to the plan, Zara said. We don't need any unnecessary destruction. We're here to dominate efficiently, not indulge in chaos. The ship descended through Earth's atmosphere, the dark clouds parting like a sea before them. As they passed through the upper layers, a slight shimmer ran over the surface of the hull, an energy field adjusting to the planet's gravitational pull. Inside, the crew barely noticed the subtle shift. They were trained to adapt quickly, no matter the environment. From the windows, Earth spread out below them in a tapestry of green, blue, and gray. The continents stretched across oceans, cities twinkling like stars on the surface. The capital city of the United States, Washington, D.C., was their primary target. Disable the government, crush the military infrastructure, and the rest of the planet would fall into line. The Valthera hovered invisibly over the heart of the city. The humans below were oblivious to the presence of a ship large enough to cast a shadow across an entire city block. Its cloaking technology masked not only its appearance but also its energy signature. The Valtherans were practically invisible. Activate the teleportation sequence, Zara commanded. With a hum, the 6 warriors dematerialized in a shimmering light, only to reappear on the ground of the National Mall, right in front of the Washington Monument. It was dusk, and a few tourists still wandered the area, gawking at the structures that once symbolized the might of a now obsolete human civilization. Zara's boots touched the grass with a light thud, her posture radiating command. The other Valtheran women flanked her, forming a perfect tactical formation. They each held plasma rifles, their sleek designs almost decorative in the hands of warriors who barely needed them to subdue such a weak species. Their armor gleamed under the fading sunlight, catching the attention of a few startled humans. Within moments, a small crowd began to gather around them. The humans, oblivious to the danger they were in, approached out of curiosity rather than fear. Zara found it amusing, almost insulting, that these creatures didn't even recognize a threat when it stood before them. They gazed at the alien women with wide eyes, murmuring among themselves. "We should eliminate them as a display of force," Sarah muttered, raising her plasma rifle slightly. Zara shook her head. "No need. They'll soon learn who rules them." But something strange was already happening. As more humans gathered, Zara felt a subtle shift in the atmosphere, almost as though the air had thickened. Her senses, finely tuned for detecting danger, began to tingle, though there was no visible threat. A peculiar warmth spread through her body, originating from her chest and radiating outward. She frowned and glanced at Lexi. "Are you sensing this?" she whispered, her voice laced with confusion. Lexi was already scanning the area with her wrist device. "There's something in the air. A biochemical reaction we didn't anticipate. It's interacting with our physiology." Zara tried to focus, but the warmth was intensifying. It wasn't unpleasant, on the contrary, it was strangely soothing, almost intoxicating. Her thoughts began to cloud, her usual sharp focus blurring. Around her, the humans weren't fleeing in fear, they were smiling. They stepped closer, and for the first time in Zara's life, she found herself fixated on their appearance, especially the men. One of the human males, tall and muscular, moved closer to Zara. His gaze was intense, not with fear, but something else. His eyes locked with hers, and the warmth inside her flared up, pulsing in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her body tensed, unfamiliar sensations stirring deep within her, feelings she had never experienced. He spoke, but Zara barely registered the words. His voice was like a melody she couldn't ignore, tugging at her in ways that made no sense. She felt an impulse, primal and overwhelming, rising within her. "Commander." Lexi's voice trembled. "We need to return to the ship. Something is very wrong." But Zara didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was no longer her own. Instead of crushing the humans as planned, the Valthorans found themselves ensnared by something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The invasion was no longer about domination. It was about survival. And it was just beginning. Zara blinked as she tried to shake the haze that had fallen over her mind. Her focus, so sharp and unyielding just moments ago, now felt distant and fractured. The human man standing before her extended his hand, his smile warm and inviting. His presence was comforting. No, that couldn't be right. Zara was a warrior, bred and trained for conquest, not for these sudden, confusing emotions. Yet, the longer she stood there, the more she felt the world shifting beneath her feet. "Welcome to Earth," the man said in a deep, soothing voice. His accent was strange, yet the words resonated through her in ways she couldn't explain. When his hand brushed hers, Zara felt an unexpected jolt, a surge of warmth coursing through her veins, stronger than anything she had ever felt in battle. For a moment, she simply stood there, dumbfounded. Around her, her squad mates were experiencing similar reactions. Lexi, the scientist, looked dazed as another human, a woman this time, spoke to her in low, melodic tones. Lexi, who was usually quick to analyze and adapt to new situations, appeared visibly shaken, her hand absent-mindedly resting against her chest, where her heart seemed to race. "I don't understand what's happening," Lexi murmured, her voice a whisper as her gaze lingered on the human woman, who smiled back at her with an almost flirtatious look. Sarah, their weapons specialist, was normally the most aggressive among them, always eager for a fight. Now, though, she stood frozen, her weapon lowered, staring wide-eyed at a human who was no taller than she was, but his presence seemed to mesmerize her. His eyes locked onto hers, and instead of sizing him up as a potential enemy, Sarah seemed entranced. "I think they like us," Rena, the youngest of the group, whispered. Her voice was breathless, her cheeks flushed. She had barely moved since the humans had begun gathering around them, her pulse visibly quickening as one of the men approached her, speaking softly, his tone more intimate than threatening. Zara clenched her fists, trying to focus. Snap out of it, she hissed through gritted teeth, though even her own command lacked the force it should have had. Her body wasn't responding the way it was supposed to. Instead, it was reacting surrendering to these humans in a way she had never anticipated. This wasn't just a failure of strategy. This was something deeper, something insidious. "We need to get back to the ship," Lexi said, her voice quavering, her eyes darting between Zara and the human woman still watching her. "Our bodies are reacting to something in this atmosphere, pheromones, perhaps. It's disrupting our focus." "I can barely think." Zara nodded, but even as she did, the man beside her gently touched her arm, and every muscle in her body tensed. A flood of sensations overwhelmed her, and she had to fight the sudden, inexplicable desire to remain in his presence. "Commander," he said softly, his voice a rich, inviting sound. Zara's breath caught. How did this human know her rank? And why did his voice, so low and soothing, make her feel so vulnerable? She had faced down alien warlords without flinching, and yet this man, with his gentle words and calm demeanor, made her knees weak. She pulled her arm back, but it took all of her willpower to do so. This is not right," Zara growled, forcing herself to step away, but her body protested, a strange longing swelling in her chest. Lexi tapped frantically on her wrist scanner, her hands trembling. "The atmospheric interaction is more complex than we thought. It's not just pheromones, there's something about this planet's electromagnetic field that's amplifying our biochemistry. It's making us susceptible to their presence." Zara gritted her teeth, trying to clear her mind, but the fog only thickened. More humans were approaching now, forming a loose circle around the aliens. But they weren't hostile, their eyes were filled with something Zara didn't recognize. Admiration? Curiosity? Desire? She glanced at Sarah, who was openly staring at the human man beside her, her usual bravado completely gone. Even Sarah's posture had softened, her eyes no longer sharp and cold but wide and uncertain. The man beside her whispered something, and Sarah, against all odds, smiled. Zara felt a surge of panic. This wasn't just some tactical error. This was a trap unlike anything she had ever encountered. The Valthorans had prepared for military defenses, energy weapons, and biological threats, but they had never anticipated a psychological attack like this. Their species was known for emotional discipline, for resisting temptation and controlling desires. Yet here, on this strange planet, they were unraveling before their own eyes. "Commander," Lexi said, more urgently this time. "We have to go. Our minds, our bodies, they're not built to withstand this kind of influence." Zara took a deep breath, but even that simple act felt charged with desire. Her pulse quickened, her muscles felt heavy, and every fiber of her being screamed for her to stay, to touch, to connect, to surrender to these incomprehensible new feelings. "No," Zara forced out, her voice low and strained. "We need to dash." But before she could finish her sentence, the human man moved closer again, his proximity overwhelming her senses. The warmth, the pull, it was impossible to resist. His hand touched her arm again, and this time Zara didn't pull away. Instead, she found herself stepping toward him, her body betraying her will, her mind spiraling into confusion. She looked up into his eyes, and for a moment, the thought of conquest, of duty, of anything beyond this moment slipped away. "Zara," he whispered softly, his voice a breath against her skin. How did he know her name? That was the last coherent thought she had before the full wave of sensations crashed over her, drowning out every ounce of reason she had left. Across the field, Lexi was frantically tapping her wrist device, but her hands were shaking too much to maintain control. "We're compromised," she muttered, panic creeping into her usually calm voice. "Our bodies are reacting faster than I thought possible. We need to dash." But as she turned to issue the command to retreat, her words faltered. She looked up and saw the human woman standing just inches away from her, smiling. Lexi's breath caught in her throat. She felt herself drawn into the woman's gaze, her body tingling with warmth, her thoughts slipping out of her control. Before she knew it, the human woman reached out and gently brushed Lexi's cheek with her fingers. The touch sent a jolt of pleasure through Lexi's entire body, and she shuddered. "We need to leave," Lexi whispered, but even she didn't sound convincing anymore. The desire to stay to surrender was overwhelming. All around her, the Valthuran warriors were falling under the same spell. Zara, Sarah, Rena, they were all succumbing, their fierce wills crumbling in the presence of these humans. Zara knew she had to act, but the man's hand was still on her arm, and her heart raced with an unfamiliar ache. She glanced at her crew, all of them trembling with the same primal instincts, and realized the horrifying truth. The conquest was over. And they had already lost. Zara stood in the quiet of the ship's medical bay, staring at the hollow screen projecting a detailed scan of her body. The data was unmistakable, but her mind struggled to accept it. She blinked, her vision still a little blurry from the aftermath of what had happened on the surface. Her body felt different, off balance. Next to her, Lexi tapped nervously on the console, her face pale, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Commander," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The results are clear." "Don't say it," Zara snapped, cutting her off. Her voice, usually strong and authoritative, now cracked under the weight of the realization sinking in. But she couldn't deny it any longer. The scans were conclusive. The Valthuran's warriors engineered for conquest, genetically perfected for dominance, were pregnant. All of them. Lexi swallowed hard. "It's impossible, I know, but the evidence is right here. The biological interaction between us and the humans triggered some kind of hyper-accelerated reproductive process. It's beyond anything we've ever seen." Zara's fists clenched, her nails digging into her palms. Her mind raced back to the moment it all started, to the instant the human man had touched her arm, sending a rush of heat through her body that she'd never experienced before. That simple, innocent touch had undone everything. Her training, her genetic enhancements, her cold, calculated nature, it had all crumbled in the face of Earth's invisible weapon. The others, too, were scattered throughout the ship's medical bay, each one lost in their own shock. Sarah, the most defiant among them, paced back and forth like a caged animal, her normally fierce demeanor shattered. Rena, the youngest of the crew, sat frozen on the edge of one of the medical beds, staring blankly at the floor, her hands trembling. "I thought we were invincible," Rena murmured, barely audible. "How did this happen?" "We were supposed to conquer them, not dash." She cut herself off, unable to finish the sentence. Zara didn't need her to. The truth was already etched into the faces of her crew. They had lost. Not in battle, not in any way they could have predicted or prepared for, but in something far more personal, far more intimate. The humans hadn't even fought back. They hadn't needed to. Lexi looked up from her console, her usually sharp analytical mind now fogged by confusion. Their atmosphere, their biology, it's different from anything we've encountered before. There's something in their biochemistry that catalyzed a reaction in our bodies, something beyond pheromones or electromagnetic fields. It's like nature itself turned against us. Sarah scoffed, though her voice was tight with anxiety. "You're telling me a bunch of primitive apes managed to outsmart us without even trying? This can't be real. I refuse to believe it." Zara's eyes narrowed, her thoughts racing as she pieced together the events. It had all happened so fast. One minute, they were marching onto Earth's surface, ready to impose their will, and the next, they were captivated, overwhelmed by feelings they had never been taught to control, desires they had never been trained to resist. And now, they were paying the price. "Lexi, give me the exact timeline," Zara ordered, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "How did this happen so quickly?" Lexi nodded, regaining some composure. "Our physiology is adapted for survival under extreme conditions. On our homeworld, reproduction is a carefully controlled process, artificial, regulated. But Earth's environment triggered something dormant in our genetic makeup, something we didn't even know was there. Their pheromones, combined with the unique electromagnetic frequencies of their planet, acted as a catalyst. It bypassed all of our biological safeguards, accelerating the reproductive process to a degree we've never seen. Zara's hands tightened into fists. And the result? Lexi hesitated, but there was no point in hiding the truth. We've been impregnated. The scans show rapid cellular division. What would normally take months or even years in controlled conditions has been compressed into hours. The fetuses are developing at an accelerated rate. We'll be giving birth in a matter of days, not weeks. The silence that followed was suffocating. Zara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Days. They had come to conquer Earth, to subjugate its people, but now they were being absorbed into its very biology. The planet had claimed them in ways they had never imagined. Sarah slammed her fist against the wall, the metallic clang echoing through the medical bay. We can't let this happen. We're warriors, not breeding stock. We need to find a way to reverse this. We need to fight back. Zara stared at her, the fire in her gut barely contained. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, to lash out at the injustice of it all. They were Valthorans, after all, the most advanced species in the galaxy. How could this have happened? But deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't something they could fight. Earth had defeated them, not through technology or warfare, but through something far more primal. The very forces of nature had conspired against them, and there was no escaping it. We need to leave, Lexi said, breaking the silence. If we stay here any longer, we'll only be further compromised. Our ship's systems can slow down the process once we're back in space. We can still salvage this. Zara shook her head slowly. No. Her voice was quiet, but firm. We can't leave. Lexi blinked in surprise. Commander? Zara turned to face the others, her eyes burning with a mixture of anger and resignation. Leaving won't change what's already happening. We're bound to this planet now, whether we like it or not. These offspring, these hybrid creatures growing inside us, are part human. Their physiology is linked to Earth's atmosphere. Even if we manage to slow the process, we won't be able to sustain them off-world. We would be condemning them to death. Sarah's face twisted in fury. So what? You're saying we just give in? That we let this planet control us? We were bred to conquer, not to dash. Zara cut her off with a sharp gesture. Enough. I know what we are. But we have to face reality. Earth has something we didn't anticipate, something we can't control. We've been defeated, not by force, but by nature itself. Rena finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. What? What do we do now, Commander? Zara stared out the viewport, looking down at the planet that had upended their mission in the span of mere hours. It seemed peaceful, almost deceptively so, but she knew the truth now. This planet, this species, had won. Not through violence, but through seduction, through biology, through a power far greater than any weapon they had ever encountered. We adapt, Zara said quietly, her eyes hardening with determination. We stay. We learn. And we raise whatever it is we've created. We may have lost the battle, but this isn't the end. We'll find a way to survive, and when we do, Earth will remember who we are. Her crew nodded slowly, the weight of the new reality settling in. The invasion had failed, but their story wasn't over. Earth had changed them, but they were still Valthoran's warriors born and bred for survival. And no matter what came next, they would endure. But as Zara felt the subtle flutter in her abdomen, a strange mix of fear and curiosity filled her heart. This wasn't just the end of their mission. It was the beginning of something new. Days had passed since the failed invasion, but it felt like a lifetime. The Valthuran cruiser, Valthura, remained grounded near the outskirts of Washington, D.C., hidden beneath its cloaking field. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense, but also strangely quiet. The crew, once sharp and focused on conquest, were now consumed by a new reality, one that neither their military training nor their advanced technology had prepared them for. Zara stood in front of the ship's observation deck, gazing out at the lush Earth landscape. It was a beautiful planet, with a natural serenity that masked the chaos it had wrought upon them. She pressed a hand to her abdomen, feeling the subtle but undeniable movements within. The life growing inside her was no longer a theoretical concept, no longer something she could dismiss or deny. The process was already well underway. "Commander," Lexi said softly from behind her. Zara hadn't heard her approach. She turned, seeing Lexi's face illuminated by the soft glow of the control panels, her features marked by the same quiet resignation Zara had been feeling for days. "How is everyone?" Zara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lexi let out a slow breath. "The others are adjusting. The accelerated development continues as we predicted. Sarah's anger has finally calmed, but Rena, she's struggling." Zara nodded. It wasn't surprising. Rena was the youngest, the most unprepared for such a drastic and sudden shift in her life. She was barely more than a girl by Valthuran standards, and now she was carrying something she didn't understand, something that scared her. "And you?" Zara asked, her eyes searching Lexi's face. Lexi hesitated, looking down at her own abdomen, where the same reality was unfolding within her. "It's difficult," she admitted. "I've spent my whole life analyzing biological systems, breaking down complex genetic structures, and understanding the science behind life. But now, I can't even comprehend what's happening inside me. It's overwhelming." Zara turned back to the viewport, watching as the sun began to set over the horizon. The sky turned shades of orange and pink, casting the world in a warm glow. "It's not just you, Lexi. This planet, these people have changed us. In ways we never expected." Lexi moved to stand beside her, silent for a moment as she too took in the view. "I've run more tests, Commander. The hybrids growing inside us aren't just human and Valthuran. There's something more, something new. The DNA is fusing in ways I've never seen before, creating a unique combination of both species, but with characteristics we can't yet fully predict." Zara clenched her jaw. It was both fascinating and terrifying. "Do you think they'll be dangerous?" "I don't know," Lexi admitted, her voice laced with uncertainty. "They'll be strong. There's no question about that. But whether they'll inherit our aggressive tendencies or the humans, we'll have to wait and see." The idea of raising a generation of hybrids part human, part Valthuran was something Zara still struggled to accept. Their species was designed for domination, for control. What would happen when their offspring entered a world as volatile and unpredictable as Earth? Would they become conquerors like their mothers? Or would the human side of them prevail, leading them down a different path? "How long do we have?" Zara asked, still staring at the horizon. Lexi glanced at her wrist scanner. "Less than 2 days. The birth will be accelerated, like everything else. We'll need to be ready." Zara closed her eyes briefly. 2 days. In just 48 hours, their lives would change forever, and Earth would become more than just another failed conquest. It would become their home. The next morning, Zara walked through the corridors of the ship, observing the others. Sarah was in the armory, running combat simulations, though her movements were slower now, more deliberate, her usual fiery energy tempered by the weight of the pregnancy. Still, she hadn't lost her edge. If anything, the impending birth seemed to have focused her. Rena, on the other hand, sat alone in one of the ship's observation pods, staring blankly at the Earth below. Her hands rested on her belly, a mixture of fear and confusion written across her face. "Rena," Zara said, approaching her. Rena jumped slightly, startled, before looking up. "Commander," she said quietly, her voice thin and uncertain. Zara knelt beside her, placing a firm but gentle hand on her shoulder. "How are you holding up?" Rena shook her head, her eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. "I don't know how to do this. I was trained to fight, to follow orders. But this, I don't even know where to start." Zara softened. She had been hard on Rena during their training, but she knew now that what they were facing required more than discipline and strength. "None of us were prepared for this," Zara admitted. "But we'll get through it together." "You're not alone, Rena." Rena looked down at her hands, as if unsure what to say. "What do you think they'll be like?" "Our children, I mean." Zara paused, considering the question. She had asked herself the same thing countless times. "I don't know," she said at last. "But I do know one thing: they'll be strong. Stronger than we are. And maybe they'll show us a way forward that we couldn't see ourselves." Rena sniffed, wiping at her eyes, and nodded slowly. "Thank you, Commander." Zara gave her shoulder a squeeze before standing. "Rest now. We'll need all our strength for what's coming." 2 days passed quickly, and soon the time arrived. The birth, like everything else on Earth, happened faster than expected, but it wasn't as violent or chaotic as the Valthorans had feared. The ship's medical bay, equipped with their advanced technology, ensured a safe delivery for all of them. Zara lay on one of the medical beds, her breath shallow as she prepared for what was about to happen. Around her, Lexi, Sarah, and Rena were already deep in the throes of labor, each of them pale but focused, determined to see this through. The medical scanners hummed, showing the rapid development of the hybrid infants. Zara's heart raced, but this time it wasn't fear she felt. It was something else, something new. Anticipation. Curiosity. Even, against all odds, hope. The birth was swift, almost painless, and when it was over, Zara found herself holding a tiny, wriggling bundle in her arms. Her child looked up at her with wide, curious eyes. They were human eyes, but with the unmistakable glow of Valthoran heritage. The child was small, but strong, its grip surprisingly firm as it clung to her. Zara stared down at the baby, her heart pounding in her chest. She had expected to feel resentment, anger, even fear. But instead, all she felt was an overwhelming sense of protectiveness. This child was part of her, part of Earth. A fusion of two worlds. And in that moment, Zara understood that their mission had never been about conquest. It had always been about survival. And now, they would have to survive together. Over the following weeks, the Valthoran women adapted to their new roles as mothers. The hybrids grew rapidly, their development far faster than human infants, yet their emotions, their instincts, seemed more balanced. They were fierce and curious, but also surprisingly compassionate, a combination that both confused and amazed their mothers. Zara watched as her child, whom she had named Kale, crawled across the ship's deck, already strong and determined. He was part of a new generation, a generation that would straddle two worlds, two species, and perhaps, just perhaps, find a way to unite them. As the days turned into weeks, Zara and her crew began to realize that Earth was no longer just a failed conquest. It was their future. They would raise their children here, alongside the humans, and in time, they would discover what it truly meant to belong to both worlds. And maybe, just maybe, they would find a new way forward, one that didn't rely on domination, but on cooperation, understanding, and the strange, powerful bond that had been forged between them and the people of Earth. Zara stood at the ship's observation deck once more, looking out at the horizon, the planet below her no longer a target, but a home. Their conquest had failed, but they had gained something far more valuable. They had found a future.